Imagine a Europe bound together by common policies, yet fractured by competing national interests, each country weighing its own survival against the collective vision of the Union. Now enters Spain, a nation that has chosen a path no one anticipated, sending shockwaves across the continent. What looked like a simple policy debate over electric vehicles has exploded into a much larger story about power, economic dependence, and the fragile future of Europe's relationship with China. Spain has stunned its neighbors by rejecting the European Union's proposal to impose tariffs of up to 38% on Chinese electric vehicles. The plan, long in the making, was designed to shield Europe's once mighty automotive sector from the flood of cheap, efficient, and increasingly high-quality Chinese cars that are now conquering European markets. Not long ago, this proposal looked inevitable, even urgent. European automakers have struggled to keep pace with China's massive EV industry, dominated by giants like BYD and NIO, whose vehicles have not only captured market share, but also won customer loyalty with affordable prices and advanced technology. The tariffs were supposed to be Europe's answer, a lifeline for struggling manufacturers. And then Spain pulled the plug. Why would Madrid take such a dramatic step? The answer lies in trade, strategy, and the harsh reality of economic dependence. Over the past year, Spain's trade with China has surged by 15%, and Beijing has become one of Madrid's most important partners. Roughly 7% of Spain's total exports, everything from machinery and electronics to wine, olive oil, and agricultural produce, now flow eastward. Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez has calculated that breaking with the EU consensus is a necessary gamble. He isn't simply thinking about protecting carmakers. He's thinking about preserving Spain's broader economy, which has become tied to the rhythm of China's markets. Earlier this year, Sánchez met Xi Jinping in a highly symbolic but also deeply strategic meeting. Publicly, it was dressed up as a moment of diplomatic courtesy. Privately, trade and investment were at the center of the talks. The results were immediate. In the months following the meeting, Spanish exports to China spiked 12%, covering sectors as diverse as agriculture, technology, and industrial machinery. That surge showed Sánchez that Spain's economic future may depend less on Brussels and more on Beijing. And so Spain has pivoted, openly signaling to the world that it sees China as indispensable. For Spain's automotive industry, this decision is about survival, not surrender. As Europe's second-largest car manufacturer after Germany, Spain produces millions of vehicles every year. Yet unlike Germany, it doesn't have the cushion of a strong luxury market. Instead, it builds mid-range models, which are far more vulnerable to direct competition from cheap Chinese imports. By blocking the EU's tariffs, Madrid has essentially bought its auto sector some breathing room, delaying the collision with Beijing's EV juggernaut and giving Spanish car makers a narrow window to adjust to the new reality. Analysts suggest this isn't just about economics. It's about recognizing that Spain cannot afford a war with every partner keeping its export machine alive. Still, the risks are enormous. Spain's agricultural sector, particularly pork, is dangerously exposed to Chinese retaliation. Over 40% of Spain's pork exports, worth more than $1.5 billion annually, go straight to China. If Beijing retaliates against Europe's tariffs by targeting Spanish agriculture, the impact would devastate rural communities that depend on this trade for survival. Pork is only the beginning. Olive oil, wine, and countless other products could easily become collateral damage in a trade dispute Madrid cannot control. Professor Juan Moreno, an agricultural economist at the University of Seville, has warned that one wrong step could collapse entire farming regions if China decides to cut imports.
The automotive threat is equally severe.
A trade war with China could cause the cost of imported components to skyrocket, undermining Spain's competitiveness. Spain employs hundreds of thousands in the car industry, and even a small increase in costs could lead to layoffs, plant closures, and economic decline. Reuters has already cautioned that Spain is risking economic fallout on a scale it may not be able to contain. And Spain is not alone in this dilemma.
Europe as a whole is on edge.
Over the past decade, the EU's dominance in car manufacturing has steadily eroded. In 2023, European car exports dropped 9%, while imports of Chinese EVs surged 18%, topping 1.2 million vehicles sold in Europe. That number had been just 800,000 the year before. Even worse, Chinese EVs are not only more affordable but also increasingly preferred. Automotive News Europe recently reported that Chinese brands are receiving higher customer satisfaction ratings than many European models. The EU's tariffs were meant to slow this tide, but without Spain's backing, the plan may crumble, leaving Europe's manufacturers exposed and defenseless.
The stakes extend far beyond automobiles.
If the EU escalates with tariffs, Beijing will not hesitate to strike back where Europe is most vulnerable: luxury goods and technology. Europe's luxury sector, from LVMH to Hermès, is heavily reliant on wealthy Chinese consumers, who accounted for nearly 30% of global luxury spending last year. A Chinese backlash could wipe out billions in revenue overnight.
On the technology front, Europe exports billions of euros worth of specialized equipment to China each year.
Any disruption to that flow would cripple entire industries. As Elizabeth Braw of the American Enterprise Institute put it bluntly in the Wall Street Journal, China can shut down entire European industries if it feels threatened. This crisis has exposed Europe's internal divisions with painful clarity. France and Italy, whose industries have been hit hardest by Chinese competition, are demanding protection. Emmanuel Macron has led the charge, arguing that Europe must defend its workers and its industries from Chinese subsidies, warning that inaction could spell the destruction of Europe's manufacturing base. In contrast, Germany is deeply cautious. Its automakers, Volkswagen, BMW, and Mercedes-Benz, sell millions of cars in China, with Volkswagen alone depending on China for 40% of global sales. For Berlin, tariffs risk not protection but catastrophe. Spain's defection to Germany's side has now blown open a divide that could tear EU strategy apart. The battle over Chinese EVs is no longer about cars alone. It is about the survival of industries, the future of Europe's global influence, and the fragile unity of the EU itself. If Spain's gamble pays off, it could secure vital trade and carve out a new role as a bridge between Europe and Beijing. If it fails, Spain risks devastating its farmers, destabilizing its car industry, and isolating itself within the EU. For Europe, the bigger question is whether it can act as one in the face of China's rise, or whether each nation will choose its own path, even if it means the unraveling of the Union's economic front. Would you like me to expand it even further into a long-form, documentary-style narrative with more dramatic build-up, context on EU-China relations, and possible future scenarios? Spain's choice to oppose the European Union's tariff plan on Chinese electric vehicles is more than a simple policy dispute. It's a striking indication of the widening rifts inside the EU. What was designed to be a union that speaks in one voice is now showing fractures as every member state defends its own national priorities. Germany and Spain lean toward preserving commercial links with Beijing, while France and Italy push strongly for protective barriers against what they argue are unfair Chinese trade practices. This isn't only an economic quarrel, it's a political battle. Some countries are calling for unity and safeguarding European industries, while others believe pragmatic cooperation and ongoing Chinese investment are more beneficial. The EU stands at a turning point, torn between deeper integration and a looser state-first model. Outlets like The Economist have summed it up bluntly: the Great European Divide, how China is driving a wedge between EU members. The figures illustrate the reality. In 2023, China's trade surplus with Europe skyrocketed to an astonishing 400 billion euros. That imbalance cannot be brushed aside. Europe is importing vast amounts of electronics, machinery, and increasingly Chinese-made electric cars, while exporting far less in return. For Beijing, this imbalance means influence. For Europe, it means dependency.
The wider the gap grows, the stronger China's negotiating hand becomes.
If Europe continues leaning on inexpensive Chinese goods, its economic independence is at risk. Imagine the scenario. Should Beijing decide to restrict access or raise costs, Europe could find itself trapped with few alternatives. Spain's defiance of the EU's tariffs shines a spotlight on this challenge. As the Eurozone's fourth largest economy, Madrid wields serious weight. Its reasoning is straightforward. China is too vital a partner to alienate. While Paris and Rome emphasize the dangers of Beijing's tactics, Spain looks instead at the influx of capital. More than 5 billion in Chinese investment in 2023 alone into renewable energy, infrastructure, and high-tech sectors. At the same time, Spanish exports to China jumped over 15% that year, with agriculture, machinery, and pharmaceuticals leading the surge. From Madrid's viewpoint, cutting these ties would be economic self-sabotage. Economists such as Paul Donovan of UBS have repeatedly warned that Europe underestimates Beijing's leverage, noting that trade relations already tilt heavily in China's favor. Without decisive measures, China's influence could expand further, leaving the EU unable to shield its industries. Spain, however, calculates differently. The immediate benefits of Chinese trade and investment outweigh longer-term strategic risks. It's a high-stakes wager, one that could define Spain's place in the Union for the foreseeable future. The consequences ripple far beyond the continent. When two economic giants clash, the effects sweep across the globe, from mineral exports in Africa to manufacturing in Southeast Asia. Politically, the stakes are just as high. The United States has adopted an aggressive stance against Beijing and is pressing allies to do the same. But a divided Europe weakens the broader Western bloc. Spain's conciliatory, dialogue-driven path stands in contrast to Washington's combative posture, creating a divergence that could fracture the transatlantic strategy. Analysts caution that any escalation risks severe disruptions in supply chains worldwide, a scenario the New York Times recently warned could be catastrophic. Meanwhile, China is strengthening its Belt and Road Initiative, expanding economic influence across Africa, South America, and Asia. Should Europe hesitate, Beijing will simply deepen those alliances, embedding itself further as the backbone of global commerce. The balance of power is shifting eastward, and Spain's stance could accelerate that transformation. Madrid's intentions, though, go beyond economics. Spain seeks to position itself as a mediator, a connector, a nation able to maneuver between Brussels and Beijing. Prime Minister Sanchez has been clear in promoting dialogue over confrontation, aspiring to guide European policy rather than merely follow directives from Berlin or Paris. This is not just about tariffs, it's about Spain carving out a distinctive diplomatic identity. The EU's upcoming vote on tariffs is therefore pivotal. Spain's opposition has thrown the process into disarray. Without broad agreement, the measures could fail, signaling to Beijing that Europe is fractured. Germany, already skeptical, might align with Madrid, further undermining unity. Yet if the tariffs are enacted, dissenting countries like Spain risk Chinese retaliation, with consequences for trade and investment. This is not a minor episode, it's a profound shift in Europe's power dynamics. Spain's gamble could redefine the EU's trade policies, shake its political cohesion, and reshape its role in the global order. Will Madrid's softer stance inspire new partnerships, or will it deepen cracks threatening to split the Union apart? One certainty remains: the entire world is watching, and the outcome of this struggle could determine not only Europe's relationship with China, but also the future shape of the global economy.